Okay, everyone. Welcome back. Hopefully we're hydrated and caffeinated and ready to keep going. In our first panel of the day, Big Swings from Big Companies, we're going to be exploring the behemoth topic of digital transformation on a massive scale. Something that's not easy, but it's also not impossible, as we're going to hear. We've got an all-star group of CIOs with us. They're from large enterprises, and they're going to talk about what they're doing to the major initiatives that they're tackling at their companies in order to realize a competitive edge. Moderating the discussion will be my colleague and a founding partner of Sapphire Ventures, Doug Higgins. Now, when I spoke with Doug the other day about this panel, what he told me is that after meeting with his panelists, he discovered something very intriguing, which is that driving innovation as a CIO is actually in many ways very similar to being a venture capitalist. So Doug, over to you.
Thanks, Anis. Everybody hear me okay? Great. Well, I'm really excited to moderate this panel because I think my colleague Max did a fantastic job of talking about all the innovation, exciting time for us in the technology industry. And clearly, being a senior executive CIO of a multi-billion-dollar company, it just is extremely easy to implement anything. This is, no challenges whatsoever. So before we get into the questioning, Jean, why don't you please introduce yourself and give a little bit of background of the company.
I'm laughing because I'm anything but bored. Whoa. All right. I'm the global CIO for Brambles, and most of you probably don't recognize them. We are actually traded on the ASX based in Sydney, Australia. Though, you can tell by my heavy Australian accent, I'm American. I'm based here in the US in Atlanta. But Brambles is a supply chain and logistics company. We move product around, all kinds of things, fast-moving consumer goods on pallets, containers, RPCs, reusable plastic containers. So I like to describe it as we move stuff around the world. When you walk into a grocery store, you never think about how your Captain Crunch got there, but we got it there, And what's interesting about it from an IT perspective, and we'll get into this later, is as you move this information around, or you move these products around, we've got a tremendous amount of information. And as you can tag that and track that and predict things, inventories and whatnot, you can really do some interesting things with it. And that's why I'm not bored.
Ashwin.
All right, good morning, folks. I'm Ashwin Balal, CIO at KLA-Tencor. How many of you heard the news last week? Yes, a few of you have heard the week. For the others, we are going to be merging with a company called Lam Research. And so it's the sign of the times, and I say it's a tale of two cities. Either it's the best of times or it's the worst of times. And then just listening to Jeremy talk, I had the good fortune of actually visiting his lab last year after Cisco Live. And the beauty with KLA-Tencor, honestly, is that it is the only company that actually sees in some part of its product life cycle that every chip that is manufactured today in the world sees a KLA-Tencor tool at some point in its life cycle. And it's because of us we have enabled Moore's Law, right? It's profound things, and things like virtual reality and 3D printing and sensor technology is enabled by companies like us. And so are very proud of the fact that we've been able to enable these kinds of things. And just as background, just as Jeremy said, I've got a PhD in material science. And the question is, why are you in IT? And I'm saying the beauty of it is that now the things that I did as a material scientist, I can use as applications today and enable it. And that's the connection. Right? And just as also background, I started my career finishing graduate school, doing a postdoc, wanted to be a professor, and then said, I got a position at the University of North Carolina, and saying after doing a PhD, you get $35,000 a year. And then you could be in Silicon Valley driving a Ferrari. That sort of says, okay, how do you balance that stuff? But in the end, I've said, I've done a number of roles. I started my career in marketing, product development, general manager, went overseas as an expat, lived in both Japan and India, and then I was a returning expat in 2009 when I was asked to take the CIO job. And my first response to the CEO is, what wrong did I do? Right? And a year later, I went back to say, this is the best job I've had. Right.
Great, and we're going to get into why he thinks it's the best job he's ever had. I want to thank you, Ashwin, because last week we were supposed to have a panel prep session, and my colleague Shruti said, well, there's been some news. I think something's going on with KLA-Tencor. Now we know what that was, so glad you made time for the panel. Thank you very much. Priya.
Thank you. My name is Priya Vijay Rajendran. I head up the Innovation Center of Silicon Valley. I'm from SAP. It's been my 16th year with SAP, and part of my job is I get to work with these interesting companies like Brambles and KLA-Tencor to support our customers as part of their digital transformation journey. So not necessarily looking into inventing what we can do with our SAP technologies, but keep a lookout for what is emerging in the market. What are the real business problems? How could we work with our customers? What are the real business impact? So my primary job is to abstract technology. By craft, by academics, I'm an engineer, and I'm a maker, and I'm a technologist. But my primary motivation is to abstract the technology and to make it consumable for the real world business problems, and to make it, to create disruptive inventions.
Great. One thing that all of our panelists have in common is very global perspective. When I met Jean, she said, my company's based in Australia. I live in Atlanta, but really I live on Delta. So, Jean, I want to start with kind of keeping it real, keeping it practical. You have some customers such as the Walmarts, the Costco's of the world. You can't let them down. You and your company managing the logistics globally have to be 24/7. As a venture capitalist, you're always talking about risk reward. As a CIO, how do you manage the risk to the business versus the reward of some of these disruptive technologies we've been discussing?
Well, it's a great balancing act. And when I first came to the company, we didn't have good, solid platforms. We needed to do the classic operational upgrades and all of that. So I would describe my job as it was a very classic, traditional CIO job, okay? And just make stuff work so we could deliver to our customers. But really, when you talk about a wooden pallet, we don't want to be a dumb wooden pallet company that just moves product around. We really want to leverage the information on top of that. And so with some of our customers, what we're able to do is spin up little science experiments and say, well, what if we put track and trace capability on them? What if we collected additional information and we mashed together different things and we helped you solve other problems? And so we have a whole series of interesting science experiments going on. But this shift from a CIO or an IT has been very deliberate. And that's where I say I'm the chief imagination officer, because we're playing. We spin up these science experiments. We don't know what they're going to do necessarily. We work with some of our customer bases in retail. We say, let's put a track and trace device, in a truck, and then merge together different things. But what it allows us to do is we become, in IT, brokers of information. And we broker together different solutions, and instead of building them and running them, we're brokering together different solutions. And that's why I think this is so interesting, what's going on in this space, and all of you guys, because you are potential helpers, people that we can broker together to try different things with our customers. And some of them, Costco, I'll be honest on that one, I'm really open to trying different things, and others are like, no, just keep my products flowing. and they're different environments there. They really are.
So chief imagination officer, but focus on the customer clearly.
You know what? We call it table stakes. Operations has to be running, or what? We all excuse ourselves from the room when it doesn't, right? But I really try to spend more and more and more of my time on the information, on the imagination side, on the brokering of different solutions. And that's where, in our IT strategy, I've dialogued with the board. We brought our board to Palo Alto in April of this year. And I say this is where we imagine what we could do with our information and imagine what we can do with our customers. And I describe it as that's when it's really getting fun. It really is.
Great. Well, Ashwin, I know you've been very outspoken on this topic about disruption. There's disruption everywhere, but you can't disrupt customers. You can just explain how one of the customers, no, it's all about this, not so much the innovation. Where do you draw the line in terms of being disrupted or looking at these kind of technologies that you want to implement that you know ultimately are going to give returns to the company?
I mean, in the end, the role of the chief information, and I like to call it actually the chief intelligence officer today, because you're bringing intelligence into the organization in whatever forms that you may look at. Intelligence doesn't mean data, it means intelligent choice of technology. It is secure, it is scalable, it is simple. And in the end, as a business person, when you run a business, there are two lines of businesses. One is a bottom line, which is a traditional role, and somebody said traditional CIOs and traditional IT, that is managing bottom line performance. And most of us are scraping the bottom of that bottom line performance. You can't squeeze anything more. So that's one, right?
Ashwin, I got to interrupt. You're being more politically correct than you were on the phone because you said, you know what, Doug, CIOs suck at the top line.
Yeah.
We're really good.
I'm getting to that. That was the good news.
And it's not fun there either.
Talk
Yeah,
about the bad news. The bad news is that there is an infinite top line, and many of us don't play on that infinite top line, and we're focused more on the bottom line. And so the intent is that role. I mean, so you talk about disrupt and being disrupted. I talk about eat or being eaten, right? And this is basically what the animal kingdom is all about. And that's happened to us right now, right? I mean, it's all about consolidation, and it's all about change. And my view is that when you're enabling the top line in a company, you get that privilege to basically have people sit on your table than have a desire to sit on somebody else's table. Because when I first took the job, the whole idea was, oh, can I get a seat at the business table? And I'm saying with IT, what assets we manage, it should be the other way around, is that people should aspire to come and sit on your table, not your aspiration of how I can sit on a business table, right? And so just to give you an example, Doug, is that, you know, talking about risk and talking about venture capital, in 2010, we gave out 6,000 iPads to every one of our employees. To remember, in 2010, and I remember in April of 2010, the first iPad came out. And we had not only the iPad rolled out in the enterprise, well, we didn't know BYOD at that time, and not only that, we had Mobileye, which had 6 employees, sit in our offices. We deployed Mobileye on 6,000 iPads in July of 2010. And when I hear MDM in 2015, I tell them, so 2010.
Actual CIO article on this rollout if you want to check it out. It's pretty interesting. Priya, I want to talk about SAP's view of innovation, because you can look at trends, you can have these great presentations, you can see virtual reality and all this, you know, extremely compelling value they can provide to the world. But then technology companies, such as SAP, have made become billion-dollar companies, multi-billion-dollar companies, by inventing and creating their own technology. So you are an interesting perspective because you've been a product head and you work with startups. How do you balance that, you know, DIY versus really working with startups?
Yeah. When many of them come to us and asking, so what do you guys do in Innovation Center? Or what is so innovative about it? Do you mean you're making innovative products and solutions? I often explain to my colleagues and even mostly to customers and partners. There is an 80-20 equation about it. So there is a larger mass movement of standardizing solutions, just like Gene talked about. You know, there's a track and trace, digitizing everything, connecting things via IoT, and achieving intelligence in a more smarter way, which applies to your business. I mean, it's all standard products. People are standardizing these products and solutions. That's 80% of the SAP being focusing. There is 20% of us who's actually chasing the big things in terms of what is not there. So most of my time, I don't get to talk to my colleagues. I get to meet them when I come here. I primarily work with external ecosystems. And I think from my experience working with companies for the last 6-7 years, the primary motivation for innovation or the culture of innovation actually is you can draw a lot of inspiration from the external information. So I get to work a lot with partners. I get to work a lot with startups. I get to work a lot with academic institutions in terms of what is coming out there. And so that's what probably we can call it scouting of technology trends, where we are ahead on what's coming up on Internet of Things. I'm personally fascinated by this cognitive computing and artificial intelligence, which we can take it to the advanced level of the basic business intelligence to the next level. So we scout on those things, but technology becomes an aid unless we are not putting it into the proper business use case. If you take your business to the next level, and we try to merge and marry these technology interesting aspects into the real business cases. So that's primarily what we do, and that's where the innovation comes. And I could relate so much to what Jean was saying. It all starts with prototyping and piloting and trying to see that what fits for you, and is it achieving the value, and to course correct and do things. Absolutely. So this is why it sets us so much apart from what are we creating a platform of a choice to solve all the business problems in the world. That's primarily not the intention, but to solve the 20% of the bigger ones which we have to do.
Great.
Doug,
Yeah,
I have
please.
one comment on that stuff. And we are talking about digital and being a digital, and I've said KLA-Tencor enables the digital age. And we've been always a company for almost 40 years. Before we knew big data, we were managing huge data, humongous data. And one of our customers is here, Trevor from Micron. And we talk about data. One scan of one semiconductor wafer is 40 terabytes. And Trevor, correct me if I'm wrong, you do 100,000 wafer starts a month. What was that? Right. So, right. So, something of that order. So you just look at the amount of data that's there. And so if you look at digitizing all of that data and getting that insights, and also Moore's Law has done a phenomenal job in making compute, storage, bandwidth all available to actually harness it.
So it's interesting. I started out this panel talking about how CIOs are like venture capitalists measuring risk return. I think Ashwin's convinced me that he's a chief evangelist of the company as well as CIO. We're talking about chief intelligence officers. We're talking about, Jean, back to you, talking about being chief imagination officer. So it's an exciting time to be a CIO, it sounds like. But I should also mention will be CEOs of startups here today, and I can tell from a CIO's perspective, I'm going to have all these different science experiments. I'm going to have pilots. I have two questions for all three of you. Number one, how do you know what to prioritize? Because it's so exciting, but then you can get bogged down in science experiments. And then that's the first question. The second question is, if I'm a CEO of a startup, how do I know the CIO is really taking this science experience seriously? Because I just presented to my board that I got a POC with KLA-Tencor, and I'm so excited, and it's going to be a big deal when it might just be a science experiment.
So first of all, my background's engineering, so I love science experiments, and I raised my kids with hypothesis and things like that. So that language is just in my DNA, and I would say, first of all, there's all different types of CIOs, and many are becoming dinosaurs because they really are just going for that bottom line.
None of them here, though.
They really are. Right.
No.
So no, I don't think you'd be here. You wouldn't get it. So I think it's that top line, and in that top line, you really got to think outside of the box. Now, I will tell you, I do not aspire to run all the science experiments, and I've always believed that I'm a much more effective person on this planet if it's not how much is in my head, but it's the network of people whom I know and what they know. And our science experiments are much that same way. It's not what we're running inside our company, but what we know other people are trying, and what they're experimenting and what they're not experimenting with. And those are the conversations I have with our board and with our CEO, is who's doing what have they learned from it, and how do you stretch that? Now, the second part of your question was relevance. Okay, what's then relevant back to your company? And you know, that's where I'm going to say, you know, the operating side is very, you know, anchored in relevance. You know, what's that going to do to my next quarter earnings, or what's it going to do to my, you know, operating efficiencies or things of that nature. And sometimes you don't draw that line directly. You've got to say, trust me, okay? And that's where it gets back to how well are you operating, how many science experiments you have going on, what's your reputation, okay? It's reputation, because reputation drives trust, and that drives your ability to have, you know, these other science experiments going on outside your company. That's why I think that the venture capital side of the equation, I mean, it's a bunch of science experiments, isn't it? It really is. It's how much do you keep investing, what ideas are there, where can they be relevant? And so that's the world that I really believe a future, or even a today's CIO needs to gravitate and operate a lot more on. And I'm just thrilled that it was in my DNA since I was a little girl. It really was. No one ever told me that, you know, most engineers weren't women, and I didn't care. I grew up as an it. That's what I think I am. I'm an it. I'm not a woman. I'm not a man. I'm an it. Wait, I can't believe I'm describing this. But, you know, it's you don't look at things and put them in these little categories. You don't categorize everything. You look at them in a more generic, with a very, very open mind. And it's just amazing. I have to say one other piece, though.
Please.
Jeremy's session, for those of you who went there yesterday, that virtual reality lab, they don't build those technologies. What he does is he glues together and assimilates different things to have different key learnings. Isn't that similar to what we should be doing in IT? Isn't that similar? We shouldn't be building everything. We shouldn't be, you know, customizing everything. We should be brokering together these different things, and not always saying, well, what's the ROCE or the IRR on it? You know, because sometimes you don't know. And if you play it safe in your box, you know, you're going to be boring and uninteresting.
Thanks. Okay, Ashwin, so I read all these CIO magazine articles about you, and I'm a go-getting sales executive, and I want to get your attention. How do I do that?
So I spend approximately 25% of my time working with startups and early startups. And basically, I've got that privilege of saying, when I first became CIO, I decided to completely outsource my operations. I run a completely outsourced operation. I spend less than 10% of my time running and worrying about operations. So I'm fortunate in that regard, but it was by design, because as a business person, I've always realized one thing, is that commodity should be bought at spot price. You don't pay a premium of being in Silicon Valley and doing L3 SAP tickets. That is not it. I am sorry. So that's the first thing. There was an uproar when I first decided to move it. A lot of other people are doing it now, and the cloud is enabling a lot of this stuff. So my view is, okay, 25% of my time is spent on startups. Why? Because 80% of my budget is utilized by only 6 companies, and I'm not going to name them here, but everyone knows what those 6 companies are. And it is my intent to actually disrupt those people. Because if you're consuming 80% of my budget, there is very little I can do. And it's not like you go raise your hand and I say, oh, I want some more money. There's no more money. And so over time, I think we as CIOs have all added stuff. It's all, oh, there is this one solution that will solve your security problem, your data problem, and Rami, yes, HANA. All of that will be bought in, right? Right. So
3 more times.
Right. So the point is that, look, how do you disrupt these? And the only way you can actually disrupt is working with early start companies and making them successful. And that's what I spend most of my time. And I gave you an example for Mobile Iron, for example. We started FireEye, another company we started. Caspida was another company that just got acquired by Splunk that we started. And so we get a sweet deal when we do that early. And so it's a shared risk.
Great. Well, I'm going to switch topics a little bit, but related. So we're love to work with startups, maybe some are science projects, but the key word is relevance, I think that Gene focused on. Priya, from your perspective, given the kind of cool view on the world that you have here. What's most interesting to you? What are your priorities in terms of the biggest trends, and why?
Yeah, so I'm going to answer this, but I just had a follow-up comment to what you mentioned. So in terms of science experiments, the trends, what I'm seeing working with the companies is, people have asked me, so how do we succeed on digital transformation? You know, what makes the science experiments click? What do I choose and what do I not choose? Because, I mean, there are Gartner and McKinsey's, and we have a lot of reports having 10 to 20 factors what it is. But primarily, what I feel very important is having a keen focus on your customers, because end of the day, you're solving a customer problem. And money, how are you going to get money? And because I'm a technologist, fundamentally data driven. Ashwin made a beautiful comment saying that it's not all about the technology. That's what I love about doing this job, even though I'm a 16 years SAP veteran. It is not all about the technology. It is not about, let's add a security layer, or I'm going to give you another layer of software. It is not about that. Completely data driven. I've had many companies, senior leadership positions come and say, can I get a dashboard because my sales in this particular region is not doing very well. But that's really not your problem. Getting a dashboard is not your problem fundamentally to do that. So investing on the priorities, and moreover from the vision translating to an action based science experiments, or more as a pilot or a innovation activity, this is always fruitful. Back to yours, Doug, in terms of technology trends or scouting of those things, we see trends so I've been working, so I'll take Burberry as an example. It's always my favorite one because we were part of the early digital transformation when Angela Ahrens came and said, Priya, this is what we want to do as a company. We want to be the #1 digital savvy company, and the mission was to create the same digital experience whether people come to my store or in the online. So this was the tagline for that company, and how it worked, because they took a bimodal approach. Well, most of us know about it. I mean, Gartner pioneers in that. We all talk about it. So they actually had the quote unquote the main business, the bottom line business on this side, and the top line. So we made plans on what are the 4 things that we are going to scout, and how is it going to drive their top lines, and how is it tied up to this overall strategy of digital transformation. That's when we introduced the Art of Trench. That's when we introduced the clienteling app, and their revenues tripled actually in those 5 times. So that's how we scout for things, what needs to happen. Honestly, scouting just for a technology doesn't happen without an impact. But always being technologists, we keep ahead of ourselves, you know, both in the augmented reality space, or it could be VR. But primarily, the investments these days are going most on the cloud and the Internet of Things, and the artificial intelligence, the machine learning primarily, so to speak. Yeah.
Great. Does that resonate with you, Gene and Ashwin, in terms of the biggest high-level trends that you're focused on?
Yeah. You know, I got to tell you a funny story. This was one of our science experiments that came up with some real interesting information we didn't expect at all. So imagine it was a large grocery store chain. And, you know, when certain seasons hit, like the football season, you know, I always call it the Eatos family, Cheetos, Doritos, Fritos, you know, all of that gets eaten. And, you know, before, you know, Super Bowl, you want to be stocked with that. After it, no one eats the Eatos because everyone goes back on their diet. Well, what we were working with this large U.S.-based grocery store chain was, you know, their feeds or their inventory from their DCs. And so their process of where's my truck of whatever from their manufacturers was very much phone-driven, calling and stuff like that. So we had some devices that, from another science experiment, didn't quite work. They cost too much that we put on pallets and stuff, but it told, you know, coordinates of track and trace. So we threw them in the truck. We said, why don't we do this little experiment? We'll figure out where these trucks are going into the distribution centers, and we can better, you know, give you coordinates of where your truck is, how it's, you know, when it's going into the DC, and then how you can get that back into your grocery stores. So we were thinking all about, you know, efficiencies of, you know, the flow and all of that. And what we found out when we took the fleet, the carriers, when we took what was on the truck, how many pallets, and how close it was with the DCs, and then the coordinates from, you know, Google Maps and stuff like that, we found that the trucks were dwelling at casinos that were just like a half a mile away from the DC. And then we also found another interesting clustering of trucks. It was Waffle Houses. And they were meeting all their, there were multiple trucks at the Waffle Houses, hanging around waiting until they could drop their loads there. So that was just kind of an interesting set of data that came out of there. And we're like, I don't know what to do with that one. But actually, we gave it back to them and said, this is what we found. It was a laughable, great data-driven example of how playing with these different things, merging together this different data, made us very different than just the wooden pallet people that were moving product into a distribution center. It really focused on the information at hand. And funny story. So I can't drive past a casino or a Waffle House without looking at, are there trucks parked around there, and what's in those trucks?
I
It's
could
just
have
kind
told
of a
you
funny
how
one.
good Waffle Houses are. No, data-driven insights. I love that example.
Yeah.
Ashwin, what's kind of your highest priority given everything that you could be focusing on right now?
I mean, the highest priority, there's nothing higher than this, is that, look, we talk about innovation, and I have got a simple word, is generate cash. So my priority is incubate a business inside IT. Don't tell me I'm working on innovative things. Tell me how this is generating cash. Plain and simple, because we talk about, you got to be innovative. What does innovative mean? I got some technology, let me work. How does this translate to cash? Because everyone just cares about cash, right? We're publicly traded businesses. There is no CEO that would say, the folks in IT have an idea to generate cash, and I would say no to it because I'm the IT organization. No, I think we are in a spectacular phase in time that we have all of the assets. Data is the natural resource today. Learn to mine it, and learn not only to mine it, but become a sales and marketing person to sell the business, right? And I'm saying we have always been recipient. Can you generate a new report? Can you do me this chart or get me this feature? Why you have to do that? Somebody else can do that better. Okay, let them do it and put your intellect in making cash. Because at the end of the day, every one of us here is a business person, right? Man or woman. We want to maximize revenue. We have a P&L at home, right? You know what to spend. And so this is what it is working for me, if you can imagine, right? Right? Just think about it.
I'm trying to imagine being his kid. It's all about cash. How much cash do you generate?
I mean, it's a question of investment and then return.
Coming
right?
from a CIO, yeah.
It's investment plus return. And I've always said, we in the IT organization have been spenders. And my message to most of my folks is that my admin knows how to spend. What differentiates you from the admin? Right? Because she can write a check to SAP, she can write a check to IBM, and things will happen. And believe me, the business can do it. They don't need you. And my view is that what differentiates you as that professional? And so the mission statement we have is that we are not the ones that can only generate business value, but using the IT organization, you can accelerate the business value. So the key operating word is accelerate, velocity, speed, right? Because the business, believe me, in today's world, they can get business value. That's not their core competence. The core competence is yours, and as a professional, you got to put it in play. And so that's the mission. It's simple. Cash wins.
So, Ashwin, I'm having a flashback to a CIO panel I hosted at our CEO summit a year ago. And I said, trying to keep it practical, there's this school of thought that, if you're a startup, don't go to CIO, go to the line of business, go to the head of sales. Everybody's thinking it's about fast, it's about acceleration, it's growth. Ashwin's shaking his head. I had a CIO say, not in my company. This was a multi-billion-dollar company, and it was, okay, you don't have to sell the line of business. But that is, again, in the spirit of this panel, it is a dynamic that you all have to deal with. How do you manage your head of marketing, your head of sales have all these great tools that you have to manage?
Right. So here's my thing. My fundamental thing is that is my spectacular failure, is that if my line of business can get something enabled that should be my job, I look at it as my failure, okay? And I learn from that experience. And so many of us seem to be saying, oh my God, I'm a victim of my circumstance. You don't know how hard it is to run a data center and to keep all of these apps and blah, 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 and how people need to feel sorry. I'm sorry, that's what you signed up for. Now figure out a way, and this is what it is, and I think that's one of the trends that you're talking about. We live in a figure it out culture, right? Figure it out. You got to figure it out, and my view is that, so the business's core competence is not enabling IT capabilities. Let's be all free. Yes, Salesforce will go and sell to the line of business, but if you have to enable it inside the enterprise, does the business person know anything about security, about IT protection, right? About network performance? Do you not require that? So my whole point is you just make the case. And if that happens, take that as a personal failure and then see how you can enable.
Okay, we have about 5 more minutes. I know that we could, as we talked about this on the phone, we could talk about this for hours. But like any good venture capitalist, you only talk about your wins. You talk about what you've done well. When is a implementation or initiative your company's been under? Vendors will be, named, remain nameless. But when have you failed and why? And what are the key learnings for our audience in terms of?
Well, when we found trucks were at Waffle House, we first kind of went, whoa, this wasn't what we were expecting. But what was interesting was inside this retailer and inside the manufacturer whose goods were there, it was initially like, whoa, that wasn't what we were expecting, but it gave them insight to a whole different aspect that they had never seen before. So I would say at first it was not the results that we were looking for and not with the optimization we were going after, but really what we did is we flipped it upside down and went, wow, that was a completely different insight we didn't expect to see. And then how do you go off and resolve that one? Because you don't own the drivers, you can't control them. The windows that they have to drop off if they're meeting those service level agreements, So it was a different problem then that emerged at the root.
Data-driven but unintended.
Yeah. So I would say, that's why I say I'm in the role of, information and giving insights and being able to shape and inform different things. So, I still don't call it a miss. I would call it a, whoa, we learned something very different. Very different.
Gene, you should be a venture capitalist. Even the misses, we learned something very valuable.
Well, you know what? Isn't that rule 101 though? If you're not pushing the envelope and you're not failing, then you're not really learning. So it's all about your key learnings and what you learn from that.
It probably helps to have a management that shares that perspective as well. Always.
It does. But you know what? This is something that Ashwin said earlier though. You also have to know how to market it, how to speak to it, and not in geeky terms.
Yeah.
Not in geeky terms.
Priya, do you have anything come to mind when I talk about things that didn't go well or as intended?
Many. So I completely believe in fail fast, fail forward, not fail often, fail forward actually. Relating to many, what Ashwin talked about, it's kind of the shadow IT concept. People talking about businesses driving things when IT is not at the center stage of things. So classic examples when we work with companies on evaluating technologies without a purpose, without a real impact to it, without a cost, because many a times we can actually put a technology stack, the world is full of options. We can go out there and put it, but without a real value and without really understanding what are we enabling and how is it going to, maximize your top line. Those were many failure attempts, and many successful attempts is, take a simple example. Most of you may or may not be interested in supply chain. We all know the standard supply chain of it. But what we rethought with one of the very famous chip manufacturers, who says that this is how integrated business planning has to work? Why the supply chain? So your main problem is to reduce excess inventory and reduce the shortage. Why can't we create a dynamic inventory management solution? So that was so there were many successful outcomes of creating innovative solutions, but something which doesn't tie back to a larger goal as pure as an evaluation, many failed attempts on those ones. Yeah.
Great. Well, we're running out of time, but Jean mentioned when I said, how do you know what to prioritize on? She mentioned it's about networking, with peers. It's about talking. So I'm going to cut off the panel now. We're running a little bit over time, and I want people to have the ability to ask questions of our panelists, but I want to do that kind of in the break session so we can move on to our next session. But a huge thank you to all three of our panelists, given their day jobs, to take out time of their busy schedules to spend their insights with us. So thank you very much.
Thank you.
Okay.